Hi guys, welcome to the Sanditon Chronicles. I am your host Maureen, and we are here with Janice, who is one of our regular co-hosts. And today we are talking Charlotte Heywood. She is our character spotlight this week. And I don't think there's a better character to, other than maybe Esther, to have a spotlight on.
No, I agree. Well, the story is somewhat told from her viewpoint, and as Chris Marshall said in one of his interviews, she's our eyes for the audience.
Mhm.
She is definitely connected to pretty much everybody in the show.
Yeah. We just picked up our character spotlights again in our Sanditon Chronicles Facebook group. And we started with Chris Marshall. And that was the interview I put in there, was where he had talked about that.
Yeah. Well, you must have just done that because I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, we closed out the day with it. So
Wonderful. That's great. Yeah. So Charlotte is very important to this story, and I think will be even more important to next season.
Yeah. And I love that and I think it's a lot of Rose Williams that she puts into Charlotte Heywood. How she just plays up that naive but strong angle. And I think both of those characteristics are in there so tightly that they're so connected. And I love that. Like when she first of all, you see when Tom and Mary first get to their house, and Charlotte is so excited at the prospect of seeing something new and something different. And then when she gets out of that carriage in Sanditon and she has this big grin on her face and she's just in awe of the work going on around her.
Right. And even when they're still in the carriage, that look of awe she has, at the seaside and all that.
And I like too that in the carriage, she has this sense of like knowing about her as she looks at Tom and Mary and what they're doing as a couple and how they're communicating. She just has this, there's one point where she's looking out at the sea and she just kind of looks back at him out of the corner of her eye with this smile on her face. And there was like a maturity to her in that moment where she just understood what they were doing, understood what they were about, and understood who they were.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And also just was so happy to be doing what she was doing.
Mm-hmm.
The new adventure.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that she's got a really good intuition about people.
Oh, yes.
Even with Georgiana, I mean, when she had in episode 5, when Georgiana had run away and, Charlotte had made the decision at the end of episode 4, I'm going to help you secretly talk to Otis. Even that wasn't bad intuition, because Otis did love Georgiana and Georgiana did love Otis, and her being kidnapped, it wasn't due to Charlotte's bad intuition. And I know Charlotte kind of says that if this is all my fault, if only I had done this differently. But her intuition about people had been dead on.
Right. She just didn't know the whole story.
Mm-hmm. But
even they only told her Edward part of it. Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah, definitely. Well, I think she was, though, being influenced by the people that were talking to her. When Clara talks to her about Edward, I think that has an effect on her opinion. Also, when Lady D does on that walk in the first episode.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think she has great intuition. She's never run into a lot of these characters before.
Yeah. And I think like when she first meets Edward and he is flirting with her, obviously, because that's, I feel like that's more Jack Fox than it is Edward Denham, but she is kind of like, she smiles at him, but you can tell she feels very off put by him flirting with her in that way. And then when they're walking on the beach before Lady D talks to him and he's describing how the waves feel on your naked limbs, she's very, very uncomfortable being near Edward in that way. And so that's why when Lady D, asked her, what do you think of him? He's, I forget the word she used, passionate, did she say?
Elegant. He's very elegant.
Yep. And she
and
struggled to find out what the good attribute.
Right. Yes, she was trying to be very diplomatic at that time, because she was feeling out the situation and who these people were. But the overriding characteristic I see in Charlotte, and it's really from the very beginning, is her compassion.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And she's pretty self-sacrificing. I mean, she abandons the rabbit hunt to run down and help those strangers. She's, from the very beginning, you see her character.
Mm-hmm. And that remains steady.
Yes.
Even when, even you could even go so far as to say, even when Sydney said, you know, if there was any other way, I would do any other thing so I could be with you.
Right.
There isn't. Even then she said, I mean, obviously she was broken and in pain. She said, I wish you every happiness. And she left, and she understood, and she forgave him in that moment because she understood, you know, this is what he has to do for his family. And she cared more about the Parker family than she did about her own feelings. I mean, yes, she was broken. She was sad. She acknowledged that, but she still cared more for them and their well-being.
Right. And even as, you know, naive as she is in this short story, especially early on, she is still mature.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Absolutely.
I think she's quite mature, especially in contrasted to some of the other people in the story. But yeah, her compassion holds over. I mean, there's just time after time after time that her compassion shows up. You know, when she offers to help Tom with the mess in his office,
Mm-hmm.
when she stands up for Georgiana at the pineapple lunch, even, you know, well, obviously in episode 3, when she's taking care of old Stringer, you know,
Yeah.
she's showing great compassion there. And then I think of even in the very last episode, when she's the one who goes and comforts Esther.
Yep.
After Edward has made that scene.
Mm-hmm.
And she's the one that shows up with young Stringer to comfort him in the death of his father.
Mm-hmm.
You know, she's constantly that. In past years, we would have called it a good Christian woman. And so Charlotte did such a nice job of comforting Esther here. Her life is all interrupted all of a sudden, you know. I mean, at probably the most important point in her life so far, and she's down there comforting Charlotte.
Mm-hmm.
And then, as I said, comforting young Stringer on the death of his father. And it's, yeah, she's an amazing person. And she's the one who gets a bucket brigade going,
Yep.
you know, during the fire. And
while anyway, Tom stood there and watched.
Right. And Stringer too. I mean, he showed up, and, you know, so
that one I understand a little more, because it was already completely engulfed and he had just realized his dad died.
Right. He was later getting there.
Yeah,
definitely. But it's, yeah. So she's definitely a person of action, and not afraid to step in and help.
And I think because we see so much of Charlotte in Sanditon, sometimes we forget that she was the oldest of her girls at home. And on top of being the oldest girl, when she says to Stringer in episode 2, I've been talking to my father, trying to convince him to update the tenants' cottages. So then in that moment, you get the understanding that she has a great role of responsibility at home. And I think she's the oldest kid overall, isn't she? She's not just the oldest girl, she's the oldest girl overall. So she is the one who's helping her father with gentleman's work, essentially, of, you know, budgeting. And that's why she's able to help Tom the way she does, because she takes that over for her dad. She's helping to fix the tenants' cottages. She's helping to make sure the tenants have what they need. She's helping to manage and organize and keep track of their expenses and their income. And that's an odd character trait for a girl in that time, to have that level of responsibility.
And it's obvious that her father did not treat her like a little lady.
No,
you know, that
because she's capable.
Right. And that's probably one of the few reasons, I mean, one of the big reasons why he let her go off with these strangers, you know, as it were. I mean, they had become friends during that fortnight. I think it says in the book that they were together, but nonetheless, you know.
Yeah.
And he understood it was an opportunity for her. So it'll be really interesting to see where they pick up season 2.
Yeah. Absolutely. I'm really curious. I'm sold on your time jump idea. It's going to be 2 years in the future.
Well, I think, yeah, I hope so. Hopefully it will. Yeah.
And Sanditon will be saved, so there won't be a reason for Eliza and Sydney to come back, because Sanditon will already have been saved, and so they're out of the picture now. It still makes me sad that he's going to spend eternity with Eliza. There's got to be a
Well,
way
who
to keep
knows
him
what will
out of the
happen.
series, but keep him away from Eliza too. There has to be a way to do that, and I hope they figure it out because that's sad.
Well, we'll see. It'll be interesting. It will. I'm sure we're in for a lot of interesting surprises.
And I
Just
think
based,
even like Charlotte, I think she would be willing to help with that too.
yeah,
Because she's not, even though she would recognize there's no chance for us to be together, this is we're over, we're done, but her love is not conditional, and I think that
right.
she would still be willing to help Sydney be free of this woman who he clearly despises.
Yeah, yeah. She's just not. She's not. He is. So, I'm sorry. Eliza, the character Eliza, is not a person of substance. That's
No.
what it boils down to. And Charlotte is, and that is really evident in all the events that happen. And he proves himself to be a person of substance too.
And I don't think he knew he was before Charlotte.
Not as much. I mean, at least he hadn't given himself a chance to really realize it.
I think he was consumed with bitterness and with self-loathing even before he met Charlotte. And then Charlotte, and that's the other thing about Charlotte, is that you look at the lives around her, everyone was made better by her presence. Not because here's this pretty girl or beautiful woman. It's because of who she is as a human being, that she compassionately cares for people, that she gives people the benefit of doubt, and she helps people to see their worth and their value. She did it with Georgiana. She did it with Esther. She did it with Tom and Mary. She certainly did it with Sydney. And I'd even say she did it with James Stringer. I think that's why James Stringer became infatuated with her, because she was, without even trying to, was showing him his value. And I don't think he'd ever felt that before.
Right. She's very affirming of people. And so, yes, definitely that's true with Stringer. You know, he met somebody who was forward thinking, and she's such a great character too, I think, because she's somewhat of a modern woman. You know, obviously she's has forward thinking ideas, especially for that time. It's interesting. I was just watching Persuasion, you know, that the Jane Austen.
I know that.
Production of it I had not seen. Yeah, and I was struck again. I'd seen it. This is the 95 version, and I was struck again by how artificial and shallow so many of the characters were in terms of their approach to life and stuff. And of course, I think that might have been a method that Jane Austen used to contrast between the people of substance in her stories and the frivolous, you know, shallow people.
I think it also kind of shows you how she saw the other people around her.
Absolutely. And it's kind of sad to think that that's what her life was like, that there were people that shallow around her. We have them around us too, but
yeah. And I don't know that that's always an accurate depiction of how she describes people, how she depicts people. But I think Jane Austen was an incredibly smart, egregious woman. And I think that she was almost like a rebel in her time, where she wasn't consumed with marriage. She didn't have to be married to be satisfied with her life. She didn't want to do the regular things a woman would do. She wanted to write. She wanted to make her own way. She wanted to earn her money by her pen. That wasn't typical. And I think because of that, you can almost see in her writings that there's a little bit of disdain for especially the women who were consumed with the marriage market, for the women who wanted what your typical woman wanted. It didn't give themselves more opportunity.
Right. Which in this story, it really shows up in, and I think that's one thing that Andrew Davies did really well, along with the other writers, Justin Young, was the character of look at the contrast between Eliza and Lady Susan. I mean, you know, and one of the things he says in one of his interviews, that one of the things that PBS put out, he talks about the fact that she was really good at writing characters that were artificially impressive
Mm-hmm.
or beautiful, that but it was a surface thing. And
Yeah.
so yes, I agree. One of the other things that he said to describe this series, the book and the story, the basis of it, was that Charlotte is enterprising, and that, which is what he also, a word he described, the brothers, the Parker brothers, that they were enterprising, but she's clearly enterprising. She is, like you said, a woman of action. And you think about the difference in the conversation with Arthur when after the sermon, and she wants to be a toiler and he's happy to be a lily of the valley.
I love Arthur.
I know. He is also a compassionate person. I know we're talking about Charlotte, but
absolutely,
he's the way he approached and treated
Georgiana.
All of a sudden, Georgiana, thank you. Just showed what a compassionate person he was.
And I think that's another thing that Andrew Davies and Justin understood about Jane Austen and how she wrote her characters, her heroines, is that they weren't like, you had these overt superheroes in stories, but all of her heroines, and they were heroines who saved the day. Yes, there were some men who were in there, but Jane Austen wrote the woman very, very well, and she wrote them very, very strong in terms of her heroines. But even with Arthur and Charlotte, there was a subtlety to their compassion. It wasn't so much like, oh wow, look how great a person. It was so natural that you almost forget that it happened, because it's just, well, this is what you do for people. This isn't something special. This is just how you're supposed to be with people.
Yes, because it comes from an honest place.
Yeah.
It's not for show.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes a big difference. I've just read somebody, I don't know if it's on Twitter, was talking about the fact that they think that Rose Williams needs to star as a superhero in one of the superheroes. She needs a part as a superhero.
She already does. She plays Charlotte Heywood.
Yeah. Which definitely fits our definition.
Exactly. And I like that there's the subtlety goes beyond that to say, like, even in Turlough's character, in Arthur, he seems like this, and much like Tom Parker does too, he seems like this silly egregious buffoon almost, and he's just like, and I love Arthur to begin with because he makes me laugh, because he's such a silly, eccentric character. But then you look at the fire and what he says to his brother afterwards. He's like, listen, I will take care of you. You can have everything that I have. And you see that juxtaposition between those characters. And that's something else Jane Austen did well that Andrew and Justin and the other writers had picked up on and put in their story. And you can see that with Charlotte, that Charlotte loves to laugh. She loves to enjoy life. She's vibrant. She's young. She's youthful. But there are moments where she just knows she can read the room better than your average person. And like with After the Fire, when Lady Denham is harassing and haranguing Tom for his stupid decision to not get insurance, and it was a stupid decision to not get insurance, Charlotte is the one who says the logical thing. Charlotte is the one who brings everyone down. Charlotte is one whose voice that has maturity and strength and conviction that brings Lady Denham to see reason.
Right. And yes, and that's true. You see that definitely in the whole pursuit of trying to rescue Georgiana when she's been kidnapped.
Yep.
It's really interesting the way they wrote it between her and Sydney, but we'll get into that more next time. But she brings that logic to it, the calm reasoning, which is really important. Yeah, with Lady D. I mean, and Lady D can be very logical. She just, is reacting with emotion so often.
Yeah.
But yeah, and even when she goes to visit her to apologize for the pineapple luncheon, she still holds her ground. I love that she really does stand up for herself, and she holds her ground. And she says to her, so Lady D keeps asking for opinions, so she gives it. And then Lady D realizes that she has been very logical with her. And yes,
Yeah.
you think I didn't treat her very well. And then yes, that's the case. And, so it is the logic of it, I mean, she's not always walking around with emotion, which for this era, you see a lot more emotion out of the women. They're not seen as problem solvers. I'm sure a
Yeah.
lot more of them were than the way they were seen.
Yeah. They were meant to be props to help boost their husbands or their father's status.
And especially the upper class women.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure, the servants and the housekeepers and all those people obviously had to be very enterprising. And that's one of the things that sets her apart. She isn't from a fluffy place. She's
Yeah.
from a place where they work.
Mm-hmm. And I think too that you look at the women from that time period, the women who didn't have as much money, and even though she comes from a gentleman's family, I mean, her father is a gentleman. He owns land, he has tenants, he's a gentleman, but they aren't wealthy. And so you look at women who are from that sphere, women who are maybe less off, who have tradesmen for family members or for parents. They have to, a lot of them are enterprising, a lot of them are very, very smart and intelligent because they know what they have to do to live a life that's not filled with fear of where their next meal is coming from, to live a life that is secure and good. They know what they have to do and they'll alter what they need to do to get that. And it's not a deception thing. It's not a wicked thing of duping some guy into marrying them, but it is a livelihood thing where they have to be this, and they know what society wants them to be.
Right. But as you're talking about that, and as I was thinking about how women sort of, I mean, I saw this as recently as my mother's generation, where, they were, the woman was the supporter of the husband,
Yeah.
and went along with what the husband wanted. Although my father was incredible, but the men in this story also are, they're more modern men. I mean, I think both of Stringer and of Sydney, they both are approaching women like they appreciate some substance.
Mm-hmm.
And Tom too, for that matter. I
Tom
mean,
and Mr. Haywood both.
yes, definitely. And so it's not just that she is able to do more, they are able to accept her in that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is they're not the dominating, you know, that you see in so many other periods, stories of that period.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's one reason why we might connect with this storyline so much, is that
Yes.
it's almost giving you a hope, because I love Jane Austen. I have loved her from the moment I heard who she was way back in junior high school. Way back in junior high school. And I've read her books and I've watched her movies and I love everything she does. And I think that's why we connect with her story so much, because she writes women in such a way that it's good and acceptable and desired that you be that way. I mean, you look at, and I bring this up all the time because it's my favorite, you look at Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy, and even Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Bennet. The reason women and people all over connect with Elizabeth Bennet is because her father and Mr. Darcy gave her leave to be who she was. They wanted her because she was who she was. And I think that Jane Austen has this innate ability to take a period piece, because that's the time she lived in, and still make it modern beyond what it was then. Somehow she made it modern enough that we today are able to connect with that character in a real way. And Andrew Davies and Justin and the other writers did do that with Charlotte.
Yes, definitely. And her own father must have been really encouraging to her.
Mm-hmm. Her
and
whole family was, of what she was doing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was reading that the first person to try and finish Sanditon was a cousin of hers.
Mm-hmm.
And that nothing was really known about Sanditon or the cousin that tried to finish the story and actually died before she did, was auctioned in 1977.
Oh, wow.
And that was the first any of it became public. was
Oh,
when the material was auctioned off at that time. Isn't that interesting?
yeah.
Yeah.
That's
So, I mean,
that's like over 100 years later because she died in what, 1846? Did she die?
no, like 1817.
It was that early?
Yeah, because that's when this book was written.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Wow.
yeah.
That's like
Amazing, huh?
160 years after. Wow. I wonder where her family kept it. I wonder where it was before that. And I also
Well,
wonder what the cousin wrote. I want to see the cousin's manuscript.
yeah, oh, there was a post on Twitter. I'll try and find it for you. The Jane Austen Society is doing a tribute to Sanditon
Ooh.
as they reopen their museum or whatever in England. But anyway, yeah, so really interesting to think about um, how and where she would have gone with this. It would be really interesting to think about,
Mm-hmm.
you know. But we love the characters that she created, and obviously, even though Andrews and these other writers took the story further, she still created these characters to
Yeah.
start with.
Some of them.
They're her origin. Well, right, we yeah, but the main character, Charlotte,
Yes.
she created
Yeah, all
Charlotte.
the mains. Yeah, other than James Stringer.
So in episode 3, when Charlotte helps rescue old Stringer, that is what a wonderful tribute to her as a character, is her reaction, to the blood and the injury and how she takes care of it,
Mm-hmm.
and have again showing what a woman of substance she
Yeah.
is, but also how she reacts to Sydney then, and the follow-up she does with old Stringer to make sure he's okay,
Mm-hmm.
and how, and then that's when she finds out really how much young Stringer wants to be an architect, and how encouraging she is
Yeah.
to him. She's really an encourager. That's one thing you see for sure.
And I think she's got a good head enough to see that James Stringer can actually do this. And I
Yeah.
don't think I just from these short 8 episodes, because it really does, now that season 2 and 3 is coming and we've binged watched Sanditon season 1 so many times, don't the 8 episodes seem shorter somehow? Like,
Yes.
why
Yes.
I didn't realize when I first watched it how short these were. So in these short 8 episodes, we can see that I don't think Charlotte would encourage in that way if she didn't think they could do it, because I think that would lead to more heartbreak, and I think she understood that. But she saw that James Stringer could actually do what he wanted to do, what his heart desired. She saw that he had the talent and he had the work ethic to do that, and that's why she encouraged him. I don't think she would have done that if she hadn't seen that he was capable.
Yeah, I don't think she's about false hope,
Mm-hmm.
even though she ends up with some false hope in this whole story. But the yeah, and the other thing when you get into episode 4, and she really gets manipulated by Georgiana
Mm-hmm.
into going to meet Otis. One of the things she says as they're walking, and she doesn't know that she's going to meet Otis, is that Georgiana can lie with such virtuosity.
Yep.
It's like, but yet she takes it all in, and I was thinking about this particularly this particular episode tells me there's this big fall from innocence
Mm-hmm.
when she finds out that slavery still exists. She thinks
Yep.
it's been wiped out, and no, it still exists. And so I think part of her fall from innocence and her disappointment affects how she treats Sydney, and when they have blamed him for, you know, being involved with slavery.
Well, I think too that she understands the difference between right and wrong well. And I
Yes.
think the idea that he had slaves was such a horrible thing to her, because rightly so. And I think it was really hard for her to reconcile her growing feelings for him, as well as to know that he was someone who might treat another human being that way, because I know it's a cliche thing, and it's not what's the word I'm looking for? Politically correct to say that she doesn't see color. But I don't think she does in that way. I think that for her, people are people are people, and they should be treated with respect and dignity, no matter their status, no matter their station, no matter their color. And the idea that Sydney was treating people as less than a human being was so repugnant to her that I think that more than anything is what altered how she spoke to him.
Well, also, I mean, obviously she got caught.
Yeah.
in helping do something she knows he was opposed to, but then mocking him in the process, and so
that part shocked me a little,
that she was mocking him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
they wrote it that way, and she did such a wonderful job of portraying it.
She did. But it shocked me that they put that in there, that she would do that.
Yeah, it was. So it'll be interesting to see where things go. But yeah, I mean, when you think about it, in episodes 1 and 2, she is constantly hit with a lot of big things, new people, and how Sydney reacts to her. And then in episode 3, how she helps to rescue a person and is so good with the children, and how she comes up with the idea for the regatta. And then that's another thing, talk about enterprising, she's always thinking. And then in episode 4, how it all kind of comes crashing down, and she really finds out more about the truth of the world.
Yeah.
And then in episode 5, of course, that's when the cricket match, and they all kind of find out what Tom's been up to some extent, right? And I love from 5 on. I love how she is she's the one who comes to the rescue for the cricket game.
For most things.
Yeah, and saves in a lot of ways, saves the Parkers, helps them save some face, because she steps up after Tom bails, after his embarrassment. So yeah, and it's interesting because do you think for a minute, if Stringer didn't already have feelings for Charlotte, he would have allowed that to take place? They were winning, and then he allows this woman to step in and play a gentleman's pursuit.
I think Stringer still would have, because I think Stringer is a genuinely good guy too.
That's probably true. He probably would have objected, but his guys might not have liked it as much.
Fred probably wouldn't have had. I think Fred's a good guy too, but Fred is justifiably very angry.
Yeah.
So I think if it were different, Fred probably would have been like, no, we're not going to do this.
Yeah. And one of my favorite lines in there is from Crow, when he says, things are much more lively in Willingdon. When she says, the women play cricket in Willingdon.
Doesn't he say sounds infinitely more alive than Sanditon or something like that?
Or lively, or I don't have the line in front of me, but
Crow has great lines.
Yeah, and his delivery is just perfect,
I hope now that we know that Lily's coming back, I hope Crow also is coming back.
I hope so. We haven't heard about several characters, but I guess we'll wait and see.
But even if you look at IMDb, a lot of these characters, like I don't think Rose Williams, and I know for sure Chris Marshall, they don't have on their IMDb profiles either that they're signed up to do Sanditon. And Sanditon is not even listed as continuing.
Yeah.
Unless they're going to tack it on to the first season. I don't know. Maybe they'll just do that. Maybe they'll just extend those seasons. But he, as far as I saw when I was looking last night, they weren't even signed up to do that.
Yeah. Did you see the Twitter post that Liam Hoops is on his way back?
No,
in fact, today, as we speak, he's traveling.
Oh, good. I love him.
Yeah, to help with episode 2. So that's exciting. So then, what Charlotte does in episode 6 is really amazing. in terms of her courage to defy Mary and to take the coach to London. That alone is just
Yeah.
amazing character, that she felt so responsible for what happened. And at the end of 5, when they're talking about what happened, it's amazing,
Mhm. And even then, that's another time when Charlotte is the heroine. Charlotte is the one who tells Sydney, do this. Hey, what about this? She's the one who draws him to the right places.
Yes. Yeah.
And she is the reason that Georgiana was found.
She is. I mean, it's a combination of Sydney's experience and knowledge and her reasoning, her logic, so I think it takes both of them.
Well, yeah, I mean, because she brought up the Sons of Africa, which Sydney would have never known, but because Sydney knows London, he knows where they meet. And, I think that they did help each other out. And I do think it was that his knowledge of London was greater than hers, obviously, because she'd never been there. But she has this adept way at knowing in her gut when something is the right course.
And of not being overcome by emotion. And using logic, I mean, he was so angry at Otis that he couldn't even think logically through where they should go next.
And even in the carriage when she got out, she stood, instead of being overcome with emotion at where she was at, she just bolstered herself and said, "Courage, Charlotte," and just kept going.
Yes, right at the very beginning. Yeah, of that chapter, that episode. Yeah, she definitely shows her strength, and it shows through that entire period of time. And you can tell that her instincts are right, but she's not always right about who a person really is.
Yeah.
And that's why that whole episode is so important, because she comes to realize that she wasn't entirely right about Sydney and the box she was putting him in.
Yeah.
She found out, and I love the way they talk it out, in the carriage. And anyway, so yeah.
Because what she attributed to Otis, she should have attributed to Sydney. What she attributed to Sydney, she should have at least partially applied to Otis.
Right. Yeah. And then her whole conversation with Lady Susan, and how honest she is about everything, how she opens up to this stranger. It's really heartwarming.
What a contrast that is too, where Charlotte is so willing and so able to be open and vulnerable with the people around her, even if she hasn't known them long, but also if she has known them for a while. And then you have Sydney, who is terrified to open up to anybody.
Very closed. Yeah. Up until that time, then we see things change. But we just see so much of Charlotte and how she's not going to, she asked for his forgiveness for what she had accused him of, Sydney, about his feelings for Otis. And she comes to find out that there was some foundation to that. It wasn't surface.
Yeah.
And so she is, I really love her character. She's not without her flaws. I mean, she can be pretty quick-tempered. Right. That's what makes her such a well-rounded person, why we've fallen in love with her, is because she's well-rounded. She's not one-dimensional. She isn't just one thing or another. And she reflects our feelings so much during the whole show.
Yeah, because I remember when she's walking with Stringer on the beach and she's saying all her, without saying that she's mad at Sydney, saying all the things that she's upset with him about. And then she says, "Would that all men could be like you." And that I was with Charlotte then. I'm like, when I first watched this through and I was watching her fall for Sydney, I kept going, she's falling in love with the wrong guy. It's the wrong one. And now I understand why Sydney was the right one and Stringer is not. Stringer still, by the way, for those of you watching, is still not the right one just because Sydney's gone. So I was going through those motions with her, and I was on that roller coaster of Sydney is, more men should be like Stringer. Sydney is the guy who's the problem. And so I think that's the other thing too. And she's not perfect. She's not a perfect character because she's a real character. And
Right.
so it's much easier to step into her role and see things through her eyes. And I think that Chris Marshall hit it spot on the head when he said that she was the audience's eyes, because I felt that. I saw things as she saw them. I felt the way she felt about those people.
Yes, definitely.
And that's all Rose Williams. That is all what she puts into that character. I mean, when I was talking to Ollie Blackburn, we were talking about those moments that were nonverbal. And he had said, he brought the point of, well, I mean, those are not scripted moments. That's purely the actor's intuition, because we can only script the dialogue. We can only script, where you stand and where you're going, but we don't script your facial expressions. We don't script, how your body moves. We don't script that stuff. That's all actor intuition. And a lot of that nonverbal, that is the reason we connect with Charlotte, is Rose Williams' intuition for that character.
Yes, absolutely. So when do we get to hear about Ollie's conversation with you?
Soon.
You are such a big tease.
Yes. And by the way, for those of you listening, and for Janice, if you know my schedule of how I do, how I put out episodes, you can figure out when I'm putting out Ollie's interview. But I'm not going to tell you. I'm going to make you work for it.
It will be the next one of those, of that category.
Maybe. I'm not going to say yes or no. I'm not just going to give you the answer. You got to put in the work.
I will look it up when we get done.
So Charlotte too, I think one of her aspects that is really, really endearing is that she is not someone who gives up. She's loyal completely and implicitly. If you have, I don't even think that you need to love her or show her how you care for her to be loyal to you. And you see that with Georgiana. You see that even with Esther, because Esther wasn't a particular friend to her. And yet in the end, and we see in episode 8, she's the one who goes to comfort Esther. But Esther has earned her loyalty by being, and I think what earns loyalty from Charlotte is being authentic and being a real person and being really who you, there is no trickery, there is no deceit in you. And I think that alone can earn Charlotte's loyalty of, well, you've never been deceitful, you've never lied, you've never done this, so of course I'm going to stand with you. And you see that with Esther, you see that with Georgiana, you see that with Mary Parker earns her loyalty, and of course Sydney and Tom earn them. I think that there's not a lot of people in the town who haven't, other than Edward. And I think in the end, Clara. I think that although I wouldn't even say they started off as friends, I think they started off friendly.
Right.
And after episode 1, you don't ever see them really connect again. And I think that's partly by design.
Well, but part of it is too the editing, because they did, that scene that they cut out when they're walking down the street together and go to the bakery to avoid looking at Sydney.
Yeah.
That is it's in the book that they wrote to go along with this series. And so, but yeah, I mean, they go do the bathing together. They're at the ball together, but yeah, you're right. There's not a lasting relationship there because they're really in two different places.
And because I think she's seen, whether or not it's justified, I think that she has seen deceit in Clara, that Clara is working an angle. And again, although that's partly justified because Clara has learned that that's her only option if she wants to literally survive, that's not someone that Charlotte can stand with, because I don't think Charlotte operates that way. It's not a dynamic that Charlotte understands. And as we can see with Sydney, when she thought he was keeping slaves, it's not something that she'll stand by either.
Right.
Whether or not it's justified.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. Yeah. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see what they do with Clara. I hope they find a way to redeem Clara and Edward a little.
Oh, I think they will.
One,
Jack Fox plays that character so likable. You can't not redeem Edward, because now we're all like, yes, Edward, come on, you can do it. Because although he's the villain, Jack Fox just has endeared us to him. I don't know how he did that, how he made us really root for the villain.
They call him the lovable cad. One description I read of him. And I think that's why Jack enjoys playing him, because he's really an interesting character. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see where they go with that. I hope he and Lady D can somehow make peace, and it'll be interesting. So
I think that Clara and Charlotte aren't done.
no, I agree. And at least I was reading some more in the book, and it describes Charlotte's uncomfortableness with what she saw out in the park when they were walking in to see Lady D. Remember?
Yeah, I remember that scene.
How can you forget? And that she continued her discomfort, and that happened after the ball and after the sea bathing. So, she doesn't still know what to make of it, but
she knows that there's something to not trust in Clara right then too.
Yeah, it's again, her instincts.
Yeah, the same ones that drove her from Edward are the ones that are pushing her for Clara.
Yeah,
at least to begin with.
One of the other characteristics, I think, character traits, is that she's really quick-witted, which is very typical of Jane Austen. So it's one of the things that we love about her, is that she is not a dummy by any stretch of the imagination.
And that's a character trait right from Austen herself that she puts into her characters.
Boy, they're true. So although she didn't write this whole story that we're watching, the writers are true to Jane Austen in that. And I look for the next 2 seasons to have a lot of wit in them.
Yeah, and that was Paula Byrne that's why I love that she's on there, because she knows, I think she even knows Jane Austen more intimately than Andrew Davies does, because Paula Byrne has studied her out. She's not that Andrew Davies hasn't, but I feel like she is an aficionado with this. And I think that her insistence on not just Jane Austen, but the time, and how she's very aware of how the time changes and what time period Austen is writing this in. And she said that in our interview, that Jane Austen is writing right on the cusp of a different era when she starts writing Sanditon, and that affects it. And so I think that having her on board is really another part of why we connect with Charlotte so much as they moved from Jane Austen's story into their own, was that she was keeping them on point with what Charlotte would have done in those times, as well as how Jane Austen would have written her based on, because Jane Austen didn't just stay stagnant. She didn't just write the same story over and over again. As the times grew on, as the years move forward, her stories changed a little bit. The tone changed a little bit. And you can see that with Sanditon. It's the darkest tone that she's ever written.
And she deals with, in the other book, she kind of hints at things like with the slavery and all that. But this one, it's much more upfront. And I suspect it'll be even more so in the next 2 seasons. That dealing with some of those issues. And she's an amazing writer. Obviously, but I think you're right. And I think that Paula is a really good asset to have on this piece.
Absolutely.
I think she's definitely has a more significant part in these 2 episodes. Not episodes, 2 seasons.
Yeah, she does.
And that's really good to see. And I loved your interview with her. It was really wonderful. She's an interesting, and also with Kate Ashfield. That was interesting to learn what she's working on. So if there's people watching that haven't watched those, you definitely should.
I love Kate.
I
want to be her friend in real life.
She's a very interesting person. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. And these guys have done a very good job of keeping it a secret that there really was going to be a season 2.
Yeah, because when I interviewed Paula, she knew. She knew. And it was a month later when Theo James had officially, he had already said no, but they were trying to get him. And it was a month later when it was official that no, he's not coming back. And so when I interviewed Paula in the end of March, she had an inkling he wasn't coming back. And so we were talking about, are you Sidlot or are you a Stringlot? Well, I think the way it ended is very realistic, and I think it would be very Jane Austen. So she had already started to sort of build that up, so we were kind of prepared for it. See, even Paula has all the compassion of Charlotte by trying to ease us into that.
Right. Yeah. There was no good way.
No. People are still mad about it. I'm okay with it. But I
Well,
think that with, go ahead.
All I was going to say is, yeah, I'm kind of really tired of the complaining. It's like, grow up, people.
I just want to see what's coming next.
Right. I mean, we all have disappointments in life. This is one of them. Let's move on and enjoy the cast and the crew that are bringing us the next two.
Yeah, and I'm really, and I've said this before, but we only had 8 episodes to love these characters. Now we have 2 full seasons to love these characters and more. So I don't know how that doesn't excite people.
There are only 6 episode seasons, but
yes, but that's 4 more than we had before.
That's right. Yeah, it'll really be fun.
I was kind of hoping that there would be 8 episodes each because I want a double portion.
Yes, I'm with you. It's interesting when you're streaming some of these shows to see how some seasons were longer than others, and you know, so it's not that unusual.
Yeah,
it'll and they're smart. I think that they're filming them back to back, and then they'll take more time, I'm sure, editing the second one than the first.
Yeah,
just because, you know, then you haven't got to try and get this ensemble cast back together, which is no small deal.
Yeah, absolutely. And they, once the second season releases, then they still have a cushion where, you know, let's hammer out the second one, get that done, and then we'll continue editing the third. So I mean, it's smart,
right?
But I think too with Charlotte, there's just this sense of how she brings things out in people, and like you get the sense that with Tom and Mary, Tom had been like this for a while, even when they're walking on the beach in episode 2, I think maybe episode 1, where she says, I fear he'll die with the plans of Sanditon still clutched in his hand. So you get the idea that he has been this way for a while.
Right.
But it is Charlotte that helps her to be more bold. Yes, she doesn't really fully give Tom a full piece of her mind until episode 5 when it comes out he hasn't been paying the workers, but she has been kind of pushing him harder in the first few episodes, or after episode 1, she starts to push Tom a little harder of, are you sure there's nothing wrong? I really wish you would tell me if there's something wrong. And I don't think that was happening as much before Charlotte came. And then you see Tom with Charlotte, and there's just like he gets a little more calm with Charlotte when she's working with him, when she's kind of helping him to see things. And Charlotte has an effect on everybody in there, that she brings out these aspects in their character that they didn't allow themselves to put out before.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, that I totally agree with that. And she brings a certain joy, you know, to every relationship and every and vitality to it. It's not dull and uninteresting. It's definitely you want to see more.
And it's interesting the different types of people who are drawn to her, because you see Tom, who's kind of erratic and by necessity, and who's a little out there, and he's drawn to Charlotte. You have Mary, who's a little more reserved, a little more quiet, but very intuitive, drawn to her. Sydney's obviously drawn to her. James is drawn to her. Georgiana's drawn to her. And then there's Esther, I find their similarities very interesting, because Charlotte says the exact same thing Esther does at the ball. But Charlotte says it kindly. Charlotte says it from her own observation, not from Esther's, but then Esther says it, and it's very harsh. And it's very, this is what it is.
It has an edge.
Yes. And so they both have the same view, but one is colored with negative and one is colored with positive. And that's the difference, but they're drawn to each other in that way.
And you really see that when they have in episode 1, when they take that walk on the beach.
Yeah.
You know, it's and Esther is very discerning too, you know. She's
absolutely,
and very intuitive about people, and which is interesting because she doesn't really see at that point how she's being manipulated.
I think she does see, though she doesn't see that, you're right, but I think she does see that there is something nefarious about Edward. But I think she's so caught up that she doesn't see a way out. But you can see it in kind of the way she speaks to him sometimes, and the way she says things to him, the way she receives what he says to her sometimes. You can tell that she knows that something is not right.
But she's so dependent.
Exactly.
You know,
she doesn't have another choice either.
Right. Yeah. That's one of the big contrasts between that age and our age. And it hasn't been that many years.
No.
is the difference in how women can live their lives financially.
Yeah.
Which that was not the case at that time. And yeah, I did quite a bit of reading about when things took place in terms of, and it's not, I don't know, it's been probably less than 100 years that women have had the right to really own property.
Yeah.
Which is,
was it the 60s?
Amazing. The 1960s?
Yeah, it was the 60s when something, there was the final thing, I can't remember what it was, but I was reading that it hasn't been that long.
No, it was,
I'm thinking something else.
No, it's more like, I mean, I think the first laws were passed in the 1860s, but it didn't get widespread, or, I mean, obviously women didn't get the right to vote till the 1920s. And so it's, which is like 100 years ago. But
even then you look at the 50s and the role of the woman, women still weren't given much.
No. And well, when you think about it, I mean, a lot of women worked, but they were still very dependent on the men. And during World War II, so many men were gone, women had to step into new roles. And then they were glad to have the men back, but there was still a big struggle that really took off in the 60s.
Yeah.
In terms of, the whole women's liberation movement and all of that. Yeah. In my lifetime.
Yeah. What I was thinking of in the 60s was actually the rights of the black population.
Oh, civil rights. Yeah, which is, that probably we should save that subject for another day, but there is the whole history really, it's really interesting, because right after emancipation there was a lot of freedom that then got squelched. There were black congressmen, black senators, men, mind you, and then there weren't even very many women in Congress until the early 1900s. So things have evolved. And in the 1950s is when the segregation in the schools was squelched. I mean, that ruling, Brown versus the Board of Education. And then in the 60s is when I moved to Georgia in 1967, and the schools were not fully integrated yet. And the next year they became fully integrated. So that tells you something, huh?
That's sad.
And Martin Luther King was assassinated in 1969. So, yep, I lived in Georgia through all of that, which was really an interesting thing.
Yeah.
But back to Charlotte.
I do think, though, that kind of along those lines, I think that Charlotte felt that plight of people who suffered.
Oh, yeah. Very sympathetic person, empathetic.
And I think when Otis was telling her that his father wasn't, but the man who pulled him out of slavery was, the man who gave him his freedom was, and the way that she looked at Otis in that moment, she didn't need more information to feel devastated that he had experienced slavery himself.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Anyone around her who had suffered in any way, Charlotte was not only drawn to, but her instinct was to care for and nurture them.
Right. Oh, you're right on target there. I mean, think how compassionate she was to Mary and to Tom and to the children, and well as Georgiana and even Clara at times, and Esther. I mean, she was a friend to many, as you have said. She was a real friend. She wasn't just I'll talk to you.
Yeah. And I think that when you see, she's very good at keeping accountable too. You see that when she goes back to Lady D in episode 2, and Lady D's haranguing her, I think that Lady D kind of has that conversation with her, because I think she's intrigued by Charlotte, and how I think Lady D can kind of read Charlotte too. She's intrigued by this woman who is intuitive, and Charlotte keeps her accountable. even when she says, "You asked for my opinion."
Yes.
And Lady D says, "I did, didn't I?" So
Yeah.
even in that, Charlotte is keeping her accountable. And that from that moment on, Lady Denham is endeared to Charlotte. When after the whole Otis thing and they get back to Sanditon, Charlotte is saying, sitting with Georgiana, saying, "I think you judge him too harshly.
Right.
It recognize what he did for you, and that it wasn't a selfish thing that he did. He did that for you, as much as it did. It kept him clean." I mean, as her guardian, I know at that time it was typical that if you were guarding, usually the person who was under your care was your child, but that wasn't the case with Sydney. The timeline just doesn't add up. But having Georgiana married off to Otis, that wouldn't have affected Sydney in any real way. Other
No,
than
he
he would have
really,
broken his promise. That was it. So
but
him
he
saving
was
Georgiana was for Georgiana.
right, right. No, he was really looking out for her, no
Mhm.
matter how she felt about it. You know,
And
it's very similar to a parent teenager thing, you know,
yeah,
when you're trying to feel your oats, as it were. You're just trying to find your independence, and your
mhm,
parents keep saying, "That's not good for you. That's not good for you." You
yeah,
know, everybody goes through that, and she wasn't going through it with her own father, and he was the only one who really was there to do it.
yeah. And
You know,
Charlotte called her out on that more than once. But
yeah,
Charlotte, she knows how to speak to people. And I think that though she didn't understand why, because Charlotte has never experienced what Georgiana's experienced. She hadn't, and that was another thing that was brought up when she was talking to Georgiana on the cliff tops in episode 2, when she said, "I'm new here too." And Georgiana said,
right.
"Yeah, but people don't look at you the same way they look at me." And I think so there is that naivete that Charlotte has in that regard, but she also understands intuitively how to speak to people in their moments of getting them to be held accountable, of convicting them. She has a way to speak to them. And I think she does that with Georgiana when she says, "You can't look at him this way because of this." She doesn't attack Georgiana. She doesn't list all Sydney's attributes. She just tries to speak to what Georgiana is feeling rather than anybody else. And that's the other
And
thing. When they were on the cliff tops, her and Georgiana, Charlotte also says something about Lady Denham, about how she's not truly as mean and evil as she seems. And also she says it about Arthur, that when she says Arthur cares for you, he's a silly man, I think. Yes, but he's good-hearted.
right. No, and she sees the good in people, and she also even gets Georgiana to confess that she understands, when she isn't being emotional, that Sydney wasn't happy really being the guardian, but she needed to be managed
Yeah.
because of all of her money.
Hmm.
And so even she does acknowledging that, how begrudgingly,
Yeah, absolutely.
she acknowledges it. And I think it's because Charlotte gives her the opportunity to
Hmm.
acknowledge it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I
One
think
of
that
my favorite characters.
she's I think she's one of everybody's. I think she's right up there with Esther for me.
Yeah. And I love Esther.
Yeah.
And I had a great aunt named Esther, who was one of my favorite people in the world. So I love the name too.
I think for me, Esther, I have a lot of snark. And so I relate to Esther just a little bit more than I relate to Charlotte, because I'm not as nice as Charlotte is, I don't think.
Well, we all see ourselves differently than others see us, huh?
It's true.
And
But I
that's
think
how I
overall,
feel.
I think overall that Charlotte is a Jane Austen worthy heroine. And I think
Yes.
that they did her justice in how they wrote her. And I think that there was growth that we saw in Charlotte. I think we're going to see a lot more growth as she comes on. But I think that who Charlotte is can never be anything else. I think that who
Yeah.
she is going to remain who she is, because we connect with her for that reason.
Yeah, that's right. I agree. Yep. I think that's probably a good way to conclude this segment.
Yeah. So Charlotte Heywood, we love you, but Rose Williams, we also love what you do with Charlotte.
Yes. As much as Theo James is Sydney, Rose Williams is Charlotte.
There is no other Charlotte Heywood.
No.
There can't be. She's so great at playing all these different angles, and that's a hard thing to do. All these different angles, to have passionate dislike for some, or passionate dislike for a situation, but also have passionate joy and love at the same time. I mean, she feels that for Sydney. So I think Rose Williams does a really good job playing up all these different angles, all these different emotions, and also showing a real growth and understanding as she steps in to them and learns from where she's been.
And she's a real rounded character,
Yeah.
three-dimensional character. Yeah, absolutely.
So if you have not seen Sanditon yet, I don't know what you're waiting for. Go and watch it because it's phenomenal. You can buy it on Amazon. I know not all the countries you can buy the DVD, but you can buy it on Amazon. You can do the PBS Masterpiece subscription on Amazon. If you haven't watched it all and you're just like, I don't really know if I want to keep doing this, watch it until the end and you will find it hooked. You will be hooked. So even if you don't like the first couple episodes, keep watching. You have to give it a full shot.
Hang in there.
And let us know what you think of Charlotte. If you think that we were off, if you think she's maybe not as glowing as we gave her a report of, we want to know that too. But I think we're right. Personally, I think we're pretty spot on with who Charlotte is. So next week, we'll be talking Charlotte and Sydney Parker. We'll be talking their relationship and we'll be breaking that down for you. So keep an eye out for that. And we'll see you in a week.
Sounds good.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye.